2, 3, can you all hear? If you do prefer Spanish accessibility, go ahead and click on the interpretation or global, where the globe is, down below. And then you can click on Spanish so that we can do directly either English or Spanish. Are you guys ready to get started? Now we're going to spotlight all of the panelists, so just 1 second. And just letting you know, this meeting is being recorded, okay? So that way you can review again, or you can share this with your family, friends, and the community. Well, welcome to Merry Mondays. This is our third Monday, and we have this educational event every month. This is a panel event regards to parents of deaf and hard of hearing children, how they were raised, any advice, tips, or how they journey the deaf world. So first I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Nick Rockmore. I'm the Youth and Family Services Director at Deaf Community Services here in San Diego, California. Ando is my assistant. He's running the back end. Thank you so much, Ando. And Merry Mondays is a weekly Monday get-together where we're partnered with Deaf Community Services, as well as Cal State Northridge DEAFProject, the Deaf Education and Family Project. So thank you so much for supporting this event and making this possible for you. So now I want to turn it over to our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves and their children, where they live. Okay, so we're going to get ready to get started. Damian, you're first. Damian, can you see? Oh, go ahead. Yes, hi, my name is Damian. Last name is Spillner. I'm 36. I'm from Germany. I actually moved here to Riverside, California 4 years ago. I have 2 deaf children. The first daughter is 7. She's deaf. The second one is 4, and she's hard of hearing or deaf. Do you want to introduce your spouse as well? Yes, my name is Miriam. I'm his wife. And again, I have 2 deaf children. I was born and raised in Southern California. Started with Los Angeles, then Ontario, then Riverside. And I did live in Germany for 2.5 years with Damian to understand his deaf culture. It's a very big difference, but we're similar in most ways, and great experience. And we moved back for a few reasons. I wanted to continue graduate school. And Damian, I wanted him to experience what the differences between the US and Germany were, and give him the possibility for our kids to go to the deaf residential school. Maybe they, just give them that opportunity. So in the end, we decided to stay. Well, I'm happy that you're staying here, Nick is saying. Delfina, do you want to introduce yourself? And hold on 1 second. I just want to make sure that everyone has the gallery view on. If you could see everyone, just making sure. Okay, go ahead, Delfina.
Hi, my name is Delfina. I'm from Los Angeles, California. This is my husband, Xavier. We have a 4-year-old daughter that was born with microtia. So she has, for those of you who are not familiar, she was born without an ear. And we started, when she was first born, we decided to go for the total communication approach and give her full access so that when she's, of age or whatever she chooses, that she would, just have her options. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Delfina. So next we'll go to Teresa, if you want to introduce yourself. Yes. Hi, my name is Theresa Nold. I'm from Sacramento. I just moved here with my family. We're new to California. We're transplants. Just moved here. I think we just moved here this summer from South Dakota. We currently have 2 boys. The oldest is deaf plus. He's deaf. He's profoundly deaf. He cannot hear at all. Plus, he has cerebral palsy and some other rare things that affects his learning process, ability to move, how he eats, fine motor skills. But he's very, very intelligent, very, very smart. He's 23 now. So when he was born, we were not prepared for this. It just kind of happened, and it's a new door that we walked into, and it's a whole new world. So awesome. Nick is saying thank you so much for introducing yourself. And last but certainly not least, go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy. I have 3 2 are hearing boys, 26 and 22. And then my daughter is medically hard of hearing, but she self-identifies as deaf plus. We use ASL, SIMCOM, gestures, whatever we can to communicate with whatever environment time. We live here in San Diego, and she became very ill between the ages of 6 months to a year of age. Her eardrums and her hearing at that time. She has a lot of middle ear issues. Does not qualify for hearing aids, so it really is a whatever communication source and access we can give her.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. So first, we're going to start with the first question if you're ready. How did you feel the first time that you found out that your children were deaf? What happened that day? Damian? Miriam is saying, for me, I was very thrilled because I grew up in a hearing family. I experienced the lack of communication access. I never thought that I would have experienced a bond and a relationship with full communication access whenever a deaf child is born. I didn't know if I should sign. I didn't know. Damian said, yes, sign. He's from a deaf family. So it was normal for him. It's just normal for babies to develop that language receptively. So, we didn't have the same exposure growing up, but anyways, just getting her attention, how to get, the cues and using sign language. It was a big difference between, growing up with deaf children from a deaf family with deaf kids in a hearing family. So, it's definitely a beautiful experience for me. And Damian saying, yeah, from my experience, and having a deaf kid, it's just normal for me. There was no different feeling. They're the same as me. My whole family is deaf. So having that, it was just a normal process for me to have that communication access. I'm saying that's great. Delfina, do you want to share your response?
Well, when my daughter was born, the first thing I noticed when they put her on my chest was her ear, that she did not have an ear. The nurse quickly sort of gave me a panic look and said, we got to do the assessment. We got to do her assessment. And then the other nurse just kind of looked at her and said, like, calm down. And so that kind of got me worried. But then when the other nurses were, just letting me bond with my baby, then I kind of just, okay. I really didn't know what to expect. I think it really hit me when I came home, and I feel like there was a grieving process that I had to go through, just because I was also blaming myself. I was thinking, what did I do? What did I do wrong? I took care of myself, and I was thinking I didn't know what to do.
Yeah, that's a very common thing. Teresa, do you want to share your response? Well, we're like, okay, great. Let's go. Let's live our lives. And what about you, Kathy? What about you?
For me, I was okay with it. That was the easiest part because that can be easily solved with American Sign Language. I've had friends that were deaf in my, in my growing up years, so it was not that big of a deal to me. That was easy. It was the plus part that was the hard part.
Well, thank you so much. All right, so moving on to the next question. What resources do you feel are most important for your child as a parent, having a deaf and hard of hearing child? And what do you wish you had when your child was growing up? Jenny? My resources is just sign language for my kids. That was the main thing. Using sign language since the baby had been born, the first day. Already the first day, knowing that this is dad and signing, and using my German sign language, DGS, so that my daughter can learn two languages simultaneously. That was great. The mom knew ASL, I know German, so German Sign Language. So really now my daughter's able to code switch back and forth between both languages, and she's able to understand, what she means, what the differences mean, signs. So we're able to see her sign language skills just skyrocket. And being able to learn from my parents in Germany, saying sign language for deaf children, it's just easier for them to acquire because it's their native language. Yeah. Awesome. I love that answer. Thank you so much. Delfina?
So for me, when I got out of the hospital, I was given about 2 inches of stacks of paperwork and just a lot of information that was honestly too much for me to look through. I wish that I did skim through some of it. A lot of it was more for like regional centers and some audiology stuff, understanding your child's hearing loss, but it didn't really have much about microtia. And I wish that they would have included a lot of ASL information. My husband and I chose to, that we were gonna do the total communication and give her ASL. It was one of the first things that we thought, that we wanted to give her full access. And I wish that the packages that they give you in the hospital would have had all that information, ways to communicate and connect with other families, which I felt that I needed at that time when I was grieving, and I didn't understand. I was mostly blaming myself. Like, what did I do? And I didn't understand.
Thank you for sharing that. And we're going to try to switch interpreters now. Ando, will you go ahead and spotlight the other interpreter? Hi again. So while the other two people were talking, I was thinking about in our last 23 years of having support and trying to figure out for us as a family. My parents' brother graduated from South Dakota School for the Deaf, and my husband similarly did. And so I imagine it would have been the same support for my son, but they wouldn't accept him. So we struggled with that for a bit. Nick says, I'm sorry. But with, with a parent advocate, we had to get him into a mainstream school. So I did some research, that guy that has, with local, we had a deaf education program, had one of our local colleges there had it. And then we also had an interpreter training program in the area. And we tried to ask all sorts of questions as far as new in the field and, what experience they had. And we gathered information, a lot of research, a lot of paperwork, until we couldn't find any more. We felt like the FBI trying to get answers as parents. So we were searching, interrogating people practically. So We did a lot of advocacy. We had a patient advocate, a parent advocate. And, you know, we went to our son's IEP and everything got included in there. Nick said, oh, that was great. You know, for 23 years ago, we didn't have a lot of resources compared to the internet today. You know, parents have everything online, whereas before you had to look through the yellow pages and get through all that information. Teresa says, yes, it was a challenge. Kathy, what about you? You know, it's essential resources. They're so important. What did you have that you wish you would have known?
From the beginning, I wish I would have had everything that I have now. I wish I would have had non-biased people to be able to guide me or to share information with me. Either they themselves weren't aware of it, either by learned ignorance or by willful ignorance. So it's really, really hard when we're feeling like we have to recreate the wheel for something that's already been created for us. We just need to be connected to what was created and connected to the right people at the right time. I'm very grateful for the moment I had a few years ago. I went to a family fun weekend at California School for the Deaf, Fremont, and that's when I first learned California has a deaf child bill of rights. What? And that empowered me. That right there was like, my child has rights and the school cannot take those rights away. And from there, it was just a matter of learning what are my rights as a parent and what are her rights as a child, whether it's state or federal. And using that as the backbone of, look, she has the right to both languages. You can't compel her to one or the other. She has the right to both.
Excellent. Oh, that gives me goosebumps. Thank you. So I have a next question. Yes. My next question is, what kind of education experience did your child have? What was their experience? Damian? Well, my daughter went to the deaf school in Riverside. And my daughter already had her language from us, so it was easier for her to fit in and just go with the flow because she had language already with her, you know, but we knew what to do with our children and the school fit easily into our lives. You know, we were all on the same page. We knew about, you know, having sign language and important for kids to have a social life and easily able to communicate. So it was very well done. Nick says, I'm happy that worked out for your kids. Delfina?
So when I brought my daughter home, she probably about 2 months, when she was 2 months old, LAUSD came in for the Early Start program. And a quick story, at the time, my other daughter, she was 2 years old and I had the newborn, she came in and because I started doing baby sign with her before Sitlali was born. So she came in and she said, Mommy, I want to watch cartoons, please. And I told her, you need to wait, you know, Mama's talking. And the LAUSD just kind of looked at me and said, you learned all that in 2 months? And I told her, no, I was using baby sign before. And she just looked at me and said, oh, you're going to be just fine. And so then the teacher started coming in and, you know, and we made sure that she would always sign, that we would always have somebody to sign with her. And she was just, you know, just being really exposed to ASL, where she started signing at 10 months and communicating with us and letting us know. So we were able to meet her needs. Her voice, like she didn't start talking until she was a little bit after 2. But I'm happy that I was able to, you know, have her exposed to the ASL and have LAUSD, you know, the deaf educators, you know, jump on boards, the ones that we had at, you know, through the Early Start program, and just always signing to her.
Nick says, thank you so much. Teresa, do you want to add anything? Yes, I'd like to tell a short story about my son, Isaac. This is his sign name. So he was at mainstream because of our local school, but the deaf school itself closed in 2009. So they developed an agreement with two local school districts, one of which was specifically for cued speech. Oh, an oral auditory program. An auditory oral program. Sorry, the interpreter had a question about the sign. The other school was all immersed in American Sign Language. And, you know, the advocate we pushed hard to go to that ASL program. And so finally we were able to get him in, and he continued all the way till he was 21 years old. So it was an awesome experience, a good way for the top education for him. Nick says, that's great. Kathy, would you like to add something?
My daughter has actually been through 5 or 6 different types of placements. And this has been a benefit for her and myself because I've been able to see what does work for her. She's been in special day class with mild, moderate needs, oral only. She's been in special day class that was bilingual. She's been in special day that was ASL only, or she's been in full mainstream with oral only, and now she's in virtual public charter school, which she's been in for a little over 2.5 years. And right now that works best for her because she has visual access to the actual curriculum. And then we have and this goes into the accommodations a little bit, she has ASL interpreter where needed. She has live class closed captioner when needed, or she has bilingual support professionals when needed. So she uses all pieces. A few years ago, she did do full immersion within California School for the Deaf, Fremont, but unfortunately, due to some underlying things that were still going on in the deaf community, we had to pull her out until it was ready for her. So we're just waiting for COVID to end before we can try to do the full immersion again.
Wow, thank you. So your child in school, do you have any kind of accommodations for them? Damian? Damian says, no, none for us. What about Delfina? Do you have any accommodations for your child in school?
Just her, she wears her Baja. They're always signing to her, which is what I really, it was not easy getting into the program that she's in right now. And yeah.
Good, good. What about Teresa? We had many accommodations for Isaac on his IEP. We had to address the cerebral palsy, the language learning, the physical mobilities, all of these. But the key was to make sure that he had, for his yearly IEP, the goals had to be ASL, American Sign Language. That was a main goal for him, just so that we could make sure that his ASL, his American Sign Language, we had an advocate for him for just his language only. English, somewhat, but mainly his American Sign Language. We wanted to make sure no matter what accommodation advocacy he had, but American Sign Language had to be there. Nick says, yes, that was a priority. Kathy, do you want to add something?
Yeah, with what Teresa was saying, that's one of the priorities that we had as well, is to add in American Sign Language, because it was such a struggle to even get people to listen that, yeah, just because she speaks doesn't mean she can receptively hear you. She's accommodating you as a hearing person by speaking, but you need to accommodate her as a hard of hearing or deaf person and give her what she needs to be able to receptively understand what you are saying. And it took about 4 years of really advocating by myself, and then I got DCS involved to help push the point with the deaf community and the deaf culture of this is why American Sign Language is important and how to word it. So what we have now is so much more than what we had before, but it was not easy getting here. There was a lot of mindful moments, self-care, and relying back on the rights. What is my child's rights and what accommodations are available? She has a speech language pathologist 1 hour a week. She has a teacher of the deaf 30 minutes a week. She has adaptive PE 30 minutes a week, and she has an hour a week of occupational therapy on top of specialized academic instruction for 3 different teachers. And that's not even including the general ed. So in order to get our children what we need, it's a matter of commitment. So it's a lot.
Teresa, yes, definitely. You're a fighter. You keep on going and be persistent. Teresa, you wanted to add something? Yes, I thought of something. I wanted to add also, my son, because of his communication and learning issues, we had the school recommend a voice output device where you would press a button and it would say something so that he could be able to communicate. And they kept pushing that. And I said, no, and that would be their substitute for communication. And I didn't really want them to have that because it wasn't equal communication access. It wasn't interactive. So they tried that for many years. He liked to press all the buttons. And so instead of really making use of the communication device and the equity issues. So that was one other thing. Nick says, wow, I'm sorry to hear that. Any accommodations that you wish your child had going into school? Are there any accommodations that you look back and say, oh, I wish I had that. I wish I had that going on. Any accommodations that you wish your child had? Oh, Kathy, go ahead.
Not that I wish I have right now, but maybe something that the other parents here wish they have right now that we actually have. We have an accommodation on our IEP for limited virtual class connects, regardless of platform. If it's Zoom, Blackboard Collaborate, Neuro, Microsoft Teams, GoToMeeting, if the school wants the children to be sitting in 5 hours a day of Zoom, she's actually only doing maybe 1 hour a day of Zoom. That way she has time to work with the curriculum themselves. So that is something you can ask for within your IEP, and something that we've had for at least 2 years because we've been doing virtual education and a lot of you are new to it. So I hope that helps you guys.
Nick says, great. Thank you so much. Any other accommodations that you wish you had for your child? Nope. All right, let's go on to the next question. For some of our parents who just joined, if you need to access Spanish, click the globe icon on the bottom, and then you'll hear the Spanish interpreter. If you have a question, you can write it in the chat for our parents. Any barriers that your child has experienced, and how have you gotten through that if you have? Miriam? My first daughter didn't, I didn't think of, but my second daughter, since she's hard of hearing, we didn't know what exactly we could do because she loves to listen to things. At the same time, she liked signing. You know, we weren't sure if we should put her in a mainstream program or the deaf school. So we put her in a Montessori school that includes everything, you know, including daycare. So We also put her in a preschool during the day, so that with the Montessori school, they were very accommodating. They worked it all out. So we were just kind of worried about trying to hear without an interpreter, but she did very, very well. She did very, very well. There was a small number of students, but once she first got into first, second, third grade, now we see her doing so well. She's always excited every time she has her speech class. I just want to make sure that she's meeting all her milestones. It's a great feeling for me that she's going to be able to advocate for herself. And, she's 4 years old, so she's already saying, I can't hear that. And she's learning. My first daughter is deaf and my second daughter is hard of hearing. So now we know what to do, but yeah, there are different journeys for each of them. We haven't had too many barriers, but we're still learning. Nick says, great answer. We need to switch interpreters. Oh, great.
Thank you so much for sharing. All right, Delfina, barriers for your child that what she may have experienced?
I would probably have to say our transition from the IFSP to the IEP was probably one of the hardest things that we had to go through. Just getting the district to understand that she needed to be in a total communication program was so hard. I mean, she, like Kathy said, it was my daughter accommodating them for, being able to speak. When she did her assessment, she had an interpreter and she had me there, she had her father there, she had her teacher there, she had her teacher assistant there. And when they would ask her to do a task, verbally, and if she didn't understand, she would just look at her interpreter like she already knew how to use an interpreter. And she just scored a little too good that they were just giving me a hard time for her to go into the TC program that she's in right now. And I had to tell them that the reason why she did so good is because she had an interpreter. Just because she, they were basing her, oh, well, she has access, her hearing level, her audiogram. It doesn't mean that she was comprehending what they were asking her to do. It's her because she had the interpreter there, so that was one of the biggest challenges, I think.
Thank you so much for sharing. Teresa, did you want to go? Well, I have two things that came to mind. Regarding interpreters, sometimes this isn't a negative thing, but sometimes just placing an interpreter, they think that's fine, but it's not always the case. Some teachers are good, some teachers are bad, some interpreters are good, some interpreters are bad, so it just so happens that you might have a bad apple in the group. And that was our case that happened often for our son in the school district. They wanted to keep replacing the interpreter every single year. They believed that they didn't want the interpreter or my son to become so reliant on the interpreter, blah, blah, blah. But really, every year, to have them meet with the interpreters and meet with us. So, because we have a lot of personal time that we have to invest in this, a lot of staff meetings with the interpreters, meetings with the students, and, about his learning, and seeing more of the similarities instead of the differences. So really, the kids are like you, oh, he has brown hair, or this kid has brown hair, instead of, noticing the differences that you are similar. The second thing that I wanted to mention is, and I understand, this is the school, but our other barrier, medical cases that we've gone to doctors. Our son has seen over 80 doctors, 80, yeah, since he was he was younger. So they always see he's deaf, And they always say cochlear implant. Oh, implants, implants. Oh, you know, even the dentists, the neurologist, he's seen the cardiologist, the pulmonologist. I mean, they just keep bringing up every single time, every appointment that we have, and we have to educate them. That says our family values ASL and deaf culture. This is what we follow. So that's the end of the discussion, okay? So understanding that these are our family values, the educational environment, but also in the medical environment, and having them parallel just to make sure this is what you need, so you can get both from, you know, whatever you need from both worlds. And Nick is saying thank you for that. Kathy, did you want to add?
Yeah, one of the things that the educational environment will keep saying is exposure, exposure, exposure. And it's like, well, hold the bus here. You can't have exposure, or exposure only happens once you've ensured that access has happened. So if the child does not have access, either through a visual language or an auditory language with whatever hearing aid device, whether it's cochlear, Baha, behind the ear, air conduction, if the child does not have any of those, then access is not there. Therefore, exposure will not help. So take our children that are deaf or hard of hearing, and they're sitting in the middle of a classroom with 30 students and a teacher. They're hearing that Peanuts teacher, wah, 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 wah. I know it's probably hard for our deaf friends here on the call to understand that there's just nothing that you can't, us hearing people, we don't hear the teacher either. We're just hearing the wah, wah. And that's all that they're hearing. Well, that's not exposure to the actual syntax, the grammar, the pronouns, the consonants, the syllables. My child, she doesn't get syllables. You try to have her break it down to syllables, forget it. So just exposing, that's not enough. You got to ensure access first. And she has moments of barriers every single day. We had a barrier today, and I said, oh, we're leaving the class connect right now. And then I follow up with the teacher of, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, and this is what my solution is going forward. And having that open, informal communication with the teachers is very, very important. And if you don't have a like-minded teacher to have that open dialogue, it's perfectly okay to say, we need a different teacher, please. And this is why.
Oh, thank you. So next question. How are you involved in the deaf community? And what parts do you like and don't like about the deaf culture? And what about your child? Let's start with Damian. Well, we're a deaf family. You know, we know about deaf events where deaf people normally go. We're always involved. So my kids, both of my daughters, it's easy for them to make friends. If, you know, another deaf kid's there, then they socialize and they're able to communicate, which is great. That we just make sure that we're aware, you know, if there's hearing kids, for example, let's just say, we weren't to know, you know, because we're the only deaf people. So growing up with a deaf family, it's just easy for us being able to go to those deaf events. You know, we go to every deaf event that we can. You know, it's just easier for our kids. I have to agree. Thank you. What about you, Delfina?
For me, when I first got involved with the deaf community, it was not easy. My daughter's first exposure was when she was probably about 9 months. And that was because I signed up for an ASL class at Burbank Adult School to learn more. And my instructor, who's deaf, and she's here today, she was the one who really encouraged me to get involved. And she would read to my daughter like on her own time. We went to Barnes and Noble, and she would just read to her. I could just see my daughter's eyes like beaming, and that was her first exposure. Now we're any opportunity that we have to get involved. I mean, I try to be there. I'm currently with the parent liaison with the DEAFProject, and I try to encourage the parents to do the same. Just get involved as much as you can.
Thank you so much for sharing. Teresa? Well, back in South Dakota, I was more involved. Moving here, I mean, with COVID happening, no social events happening. So really we're trying to figure out how we can meet new people. But I work for NorCal. It's a sister agency of Deaf Community Services in Northern California. And I'm the lead K family services manager. So really, I'm fortunate in meeting deaf individuals through my meetings, through work meetings. But, I'm learning stuff here. I'm hoping that we can get involved, maybe with legislative things, a parents group. I love being involved, but still we're trying to figure out who, what, where, how, why, etc. It's a strange time during COVID. I have to agree with that. So hopefully that gets resolved soon. And, you'll be getting together like we used to. Yes. Kathy, did you want to add?
When I first, I guess, entered the deaf community, it was by happen chance, because the school district, the oral school district, mainstream, doesn't make that connection for you. We happened to be living up in Northern California at the time, and a table over from us was a deaf family. And it happened to be one of the photographers for the California Association of the Deaf, and she also was an educator at Fremont. And we met and got to conversing, and she's like, "What? They told you not to sign? That's not okay." And so it just, everything kind of fell into place from there. It's a lot harder to enter the deaf community in some regional locations than it is in other regional locations. But I didn't let that stop me. When I started Ohlone College, my first ASL instructor was Rosalie. And Rosalie is a well-known performer within the deaf community. And then my deaf culture instructor happened to grow up in the residential deaf schools back east, but also had been a professor at CSUN, and then very much in the deaf community and culture. And I was able to ask him questions and go, "Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Is this better or is that better?" So that really helped get me more and more in. Because I look at it this way: I may be a hearing person, and a lot of deaf people go, "Oh, that's just another hearing person." Well, no. My child is hard of hearing. She self-identifies as deaf. You want her? We're a team. We come together. It's not her without me. We're together, and you take me too. So if she's going to be in that world, then I need to immerse myself in that world as well.
We love having you a part of our San Diego deaf community. So thank you, Kathy. Okay, now for hearing parents, with maybe they're new to the deaf community or new to deaf culture, what advice do you have for them? Damian, do you want to start? Well, I just say encourage and meet deaf people. Never be afraid to communicate with them. We deaf people have patience. We're willing to communicate with you. Don't worry if your signs aren't right. It's okay. Just try and be yourself. We moved here and my ASL was not that great. I met many deaf Americans and I felt a little off with my signing, but then it all just fell into place. So everyone can be involved. Don't feel afraid. Please don't. Keep it going. But, who's willing to learn sign language, it's easier to be involved in our community. Most, deaf people can't speak, or maybe they're, just like hearing people. If you want to speak with other hearing people, we sign with other signers. So If you could sign well, you can match well, and yeah, everything will be good. And deaf people, definitely, we don't bite. That's right. Go ahead, Delfina.
I would say the same. Get involved. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm constantly asking questions to, my deaf adult friends and even families. I mean, it's a way to connect with other families. Just don't be afraid. You never know who you're going to meet.
Yeah, I always emphasize that. Make sure there's no such thing as any bad questions. There's no such thing as a dumb question. That doesn't exist to me. I mean, please, I'd rather you ask than assume. And Damian saying yes. I mean, it's a dangerous thing to just assume. And deaf people are so used to having those questions. How do deaf people drive? How do deaf people order food through the drive-through? We're so used to those questions. Just ask. Teresa, do you want to add something? No, they hit the nail on the head. Kathy?
I have to recollect my thought here real quick. Don't be afraid. Within the hearing culture, if we say hearing world, deaf world, hearing culture, deaf culture, but typical culture with regards to spoken languages, we're so used to not intruding, to wait for an invitation. And within the deaf community, they're not always going to invite you. You have to say, hey, I want to know more. Hey, can I come along? Hey, can I join? And it goes a lot better when you show that you're interested and motivated as well, instead of just staying in the backside.
Yeah. We have to remember that in California, we are very blessed. We have 8 sister agencies all over to provide services in specific counties, like Deaf Community Services. We're responsible for San Diego. NorCal, like where Teresa works, they're responsible for Sacramento. So we have Los Angeles, Riverside, Northern California. We have them all over the state. So don't be afraid to contact those agencies. It's a good way to start as well. Okay, next question. Oh, and just letting you know, we have about 30 minutes left. So we'll go for about another 15 minutes and then we will go for questions and we're going to switch interpreters.
How do you suggest to develop your deaf child's independent living skills? How specifically do you communicate at home? Practicing skills, as far as technology, independent living skills. Damian? Yes, for example, as a deaf parent, I know what to do with deaf children. In the deaf world, as far as the hearing world, it's a whole different culture. For example, when at 7, there were some challenges, for example, going outside into the world and knowing what to do. Should you go ahead, and ask hearing people for help, or should you just kind of sit back? And that's what I mean. You have to learn how to write English, or not everybody uses sign language, or maybe you need to speak if you can. But, sometimes you get some struggle from the kids. Some people don't want to write to them, so they have to get gestures, like, corn and cheese, to the corn with the cheese on top. And I said, no, you have to learn how to ask, gesture what you want. And so my 7-year-old went up to the vendor and said, I want corn and with cheese. And the man kind of looked at him and said, do you want one? Just no chile on it. And, he just pointed at it. What do you want? Do you want chile or no chile? That he just wanted cheese on the corn. And there was some communication happening there and he got what he wanted. So that was a good first step to give him a little bit of, shall we say, responsibility of how you get along in the world. Mom and dad aren't always going to be there. And so we need to, I was raised with a deaf family. I went to residential schools growing up. I went to a vocational training program, and it was in a hearing school. And that was a little bit of a culture shock for me because it was a whole new world. Not everybody signed around me. So the best advice was kids can navigate the world as long as you teach them what to do. Nick says, that's great. That's great. Delfina, what's your experience?
Well, my daughter, again, she uses her Baja, which is the bone anchored hearing aid. And she also just started, talking and, either through sign or she will verbally say what she wants. And one thing that I have to say, so we're constantly signing at home, always signing, always signing. One deaf person told me, I'm like, I don't have nobody to practice with. Told me, practice with your child. I said, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. So we practice with her. And, we're always constantly signing. She'll correct dad. She'll correct me sometimes. But one thing that I have always used, and I've always told her, and I always, even sometimes I have to remind the other children, is not to use the word can't. So I have taught her, I can't hear. I don't want her to ever think that she cannot do something or feel limited. So I have constantly telling her and the kids just say, I don't hear you. I don't hear you. Say that again, instead of using the word can't. And that's one of the things that I have constantly and want her to know is that there's nothing that you can't do.
That's excellent. I love that. That's great. Teresa, would you like to add? I think the same thing. Communication is the key. Communication starting early, from a baby, to have something, a foundation. All the other things they'll pick up, but you need that communication first. My son, with communication and school and using pictures rather than signing, using speaking equipment, I said, nope, he needs sign language. He needs that language foundation. And that will open so many opportunities for him. Before we moved, I was thinking about unemployment, excuse me. And I thought he's not going to be able to work, but he was going to be able to work part-time. And he was, and it was big for him to need to communicate. He needed to communicate what he wanted, what would work and wouldn't help. That wouldn't work, that helped a lot. Nick says, yes, language is the foundation for everything. Kathy, would you like to add anything?
We've transitioned from elementary school to middle school, but with the environment we're in with COVID and virtual education, everything's here at home. So I'm able to do living skills inside the home that I wouldn't normally be able to do if she was going to residential school or brick and mortar school. And it's a lot of showing, a lot of touch and showing directly, because I don't have a strong command of American Sign Language, but I do my best when we SimCom or I'm showing her, so that I'm showing her the action the same time I'm saying it or I'm signing it. But before, when we could go out the community, we would go to the store, and I don't have peripheral vision. And so it was difficult. I couldn't call her name if she got too far away from me because she couldn't hear me and I couldn't see her. So I taught her just to hold on to my shirt tail. If I could feel her hand on my shirt, then I knew she was there. If I couldn't feel her hand on my shirt, then I knew I needed to look. So it's just the little accommodations that we need to do when we have a disability ourselves. But eventually we're still going to navigate that coming forward.
Thank you. Our next question, if you could go back in time and do something different, what would you do? If you could go back and do something different in your journey? Damian? Nope. My kids, I've signed to them early, so I would say that same thing. All right, Delfina?
I think I would have pierced her ears. I was so worried about reconstruction and not messing with it. And I was not thinking about, her being a normal kid. And she told me about a month ago, Mommy, I want to pierce my ears. And I really wish I would have done it when she was smaller. Yeah, even though, and worried about the rest later, but I think that, and also balancing life. I feel like being new to this, I wasn't balancing life as the way I should have. Um, she's just constantly focusing on her. I feel like with my other kids, I kind of felt like they probably felt left out, and not balancing life right.
I see. Thank you. Teresa, what would you do different? No, there's always, as a parent, you think we overanalyze things. We overanalyze ourselves. We should have done this. Oh, I should have known that. I should have done this. You just feel like everything happens that was meant to happen, meaning to be, just, part of life is challenging, and you can see it as a challenge or an opportunity. And, if you don't look at it as a failure, look at it as a learning opportunity. Say, okay, life is that way sometimes. It's funny that way sometimes. And life happens the way it should. That's it. Nick says, amen. Okay, Kathy, would you like to add anything?
I agree with Teresa. Everything we go through right now prepares us for the next stage and prepares us for the next stage and prepares us for the next stage. And we can look at it and feel blessed that we had that teaching moment to rely upon for now. If there was one thing that I could change, though, is being able to tell the mom of the 18-month-old, when my daughter was 18 months old, telling myself back then, don't accept the teacher telling you to stop signing, and tell that teacher, nope, we're not going to stop signing. You need to provide some American Sign Language. That would be the only thing that I would change, because trying to get that has been a 7+ year struggle just to get what we have on the IEP now. And it's a lot easier to have it at the beginning than now, especially when we see the symptomology of language deprivation that my daughter had from 0 to 5. And that is a huge deal because that affects the cognitive ability for language.
Oh, I see. Good. Thank you so much. Our next question. What have you learned about yourselves through this whole parenting journey with your deaf child? How has it changed you? Damian, we'll have you start. Well, what I have learned is be independent and be reliable. Delfina?
I have learned that I'm a people person now, which I wasn't in the beginning. And I've also learned how to advocate for my kids in a way that I've never thought I would.
Wow. Teresa, would you like to add how you feel about yourself as a mother of a deaf child? It's always that you keep saying, don't burn any bridges, get along with people, but everybody play in the sandbox. But that, if I do that, I ignore my son's needs. You have to learn how to advocate in a nice way, I guess. But sometimes that nice way, you got to throw it out the window because they're not listening and they're not being flexible. They're not providing things, you know, you're sacrificing your time, your energy, and you're not giving me anything for my son. That is unacceptable. So, you know, he has rights, you know, he has, and you have rights as a parent. Learning how to be, about to have boundaries, balance, you know, going back and forth with things. But then when the right time is to advocate, when it's the right time, you really have to stand up and be tough and say, this is what we need and this is what we need now. Nick says, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Kathy.
Um, in learning how to advocate for her and becoming a stronger advocate for her, I learned how to advocate for myself. Learning that boundaries are important. And if I'm going to teach her how to self-advocate, then I need to show it too.
Good, good. My last question. How has COVID impacted your child? What do you do to mitigate that impact, to reduce the impact? Damian says, well, since COVID happened, it's been a very different experience because of that e-learning virtual environment through the internet. Oh, it's been tough for my kids. You know, they're so used to every day going through, you know, talking with friends, teachers, having discussions virtually, you know, now, you know, they bang on the table, they say, what's going on? And I'm learning how to, that it's hard for them. You know, they're used to being social with other kids in person, and now they haven't had it. Luckily, they have deaf parents and a deaf sibling, so they're able to communicate with us, but it has impacted them a lot. They miss their friends in real life. You know, they need that stimulation. You know, you can have your parents and, you know, we can be 6 feet from other people, but it's kind of boring for them. You know, they go around with their iPad, and that's not the type of childhood they should have. We sit and talk a lot, but it's sometimes a struggle because they want to be with their friends. It's a new experience for us. You know, it's been difficult, you know, but hopefully soon this pandemic will be over. Nick says, it sounds hard. Delfina, what about your experience?
Well, my daughter, has just started schools virtually, so I feel like she's not having that, you know, getting together with her little friends, her deaf friends, her peeps. And I would also have to say the mask, because when we're in public, that's when she relies mostly on the whole, you know, liberty. And that's when I can understand her too, when she's trying to speak. And you have to remember, my daughter doesn't have the ears. So there's really nothing that I can do to accommodate her as far as even a shield that goes over the ears or putting a mask is constantly falling off. So we really don't take her out much at all because of that. So that's hard.
Wow. Teresa, I know your son is older, but what about him? Well, my young man, when we moved here, we started over first looking for services. And since the end of June, we're still not connecting to anything. So, you know, the regional center is, you know, has a long waiting list. They're very behind. We need to find an attorney for guardianship for him. Full guardianship we had in South Dakota. And when we moved here to California, we had to start all over again through the courts and all that. Finding an attorney, vocational rehab services. we had to do one thing first before going to do that. So we didn't know all that we needed to know before we moved. So we haven't gotten that support quite yet. You know, we just send in the paperwork and wait. But then there's a double whammy too. He has special needs that we have to be careful with. So we don't really go out. You know, we can drive around, and now, you know, it's with holiday lights, like with Halloween and Christmas, you know, oh, we're not in South Dakota anymore. So every night, you know, we've enjoyed driving around with the holiday lights, and we'll do more of that. But, you know, with services, nothing has really been happening. So it's a waiting game. It's tough. It's hard. Nick says, yeah, hopefully it won't go on for too long. Kathy, you have any?
When we started with COVID and everything, like the shelter in place orders, it was old hat for us. It was something we were already used to. She didn't have medical clearance to be around people for the first 2-3 years of her life. And we would have to go in home isolation every so often throughout the years. One of the reasons for pulling her out of the brick and mortar school a couple of years ago is because of a high viral load. She was just constantly sick with a cold and then ended up with the flu. And she just couldn't shake it off until we came home. And then she didn't have as much health issues with viral issues because she wasn't around 37 students packed like sardines in the classroom. So we kind of understand the viral and the bacterial world a little bit more because of her needs. Last time we stepped foot in a store was March 13th. So everything is delivered here. If people come by, we open up our shades and we say hi through the window. The hardest part for her is we have not met my granddaughter. My granddaughter is 2 months old and we haven't been able to meet her or hold her or touch her, and she misses her older brother. So that from her is one of the harder parts. But her socialization was through deaf community services on Wednesday nights, being around the other deaf and hard of hearing kids. The deaf youth literacy camp through the summer, at least they did virtual day camp, and that really helped her. So that for her is the hard part.
Yeah. Oh, we have to remain optimistic. You know, you all have given us so much wonderful information. Now we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. If you'd like to wave your hand or in the chat. So I'd like to ask all parents specifically if you could, we're going to switch interpreters first, and then we'll go on to the questions.
Any questions? Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Do we see anyone? Oh, do we see anyone raising their hand?
Hi, I have a question. Hi, my name's Elizabeth. My son is almost 3. He was born with Usher syndrome. For you, those of you that don't know, that is hearing and vision loss combined. He is almost 3. He has an IFSP, and we have been told by the school district that he has to choose to either go to a hard of hearing small group at Davila or to continue to stay in the private preschool that I pay for that's linked to the school district. So my question is, what do I do? I have his first IEP meeting. I don't want to mess it up. I just want to have an advocate. I just want to have some resources available. He is speech delayed. He's shown signs of aggression because he wasn't receiving access at school. We just fixed that by making sure they're wearing the Roger device that's provided in his IFSP. But again, it's a private preschool. They just barely align with the district, so I'm able to get a little bit more assistance. but he's not 3 yet. So there's not a lot of resources before the age of 3. So people that have walked through this, I need full-time care in a school that will provide that as well. So that's what we're looking for.
And Kathy, I think you had your hand raised first.
Being a Davila, that means you're here in San Diego County, correct? Elizabeth, going to Davila, you're in San Diego County, correct?
I'm actually in East County. It would have to be an interdistrict transfer, which I was already told by the deaf and hard of hearing SEPA teacher that that's what she'll be recommending for Hunter.
Okay. Within San Diego County, you have the Services of Deaf Community Services of San Diego, and Nick and Ando can connect you with individuals there that can help advocate. Also within San Diego County, and it's throughout California, we have California Hands and Voices, and they have a couple of advocates as well if DCS doesn't have somebody that can help you. But one of the things I want to point you to is when you had your IFSP, every IFSP meeting you attend, every IEP meeting you attend, you are handed procedural safeguards. And on the second or third page of that procedural safeguards, it talks about California School for the Deaf and California School for the Blind. And up in Fremont, there happens to be California School for the Deaf and California School for the Blind. Within Northern California, as well as Southern California, they have Deaf Education Resource Center, or NorCal or SoCal assessment centers. And you can say, I don't agree with your assessments that you are doing for the incoming IEP. I would like to have my child assessed with the assessment center in Riverside. And that's something we're waiting for as well, because then you have the appropriate professionals assessing your child. They have been doing deaf education with hard of hearing, profoundly deaf, multifaceted plus and involved as well, and not just the regional DHH program for where you're located.
Okay, thank you.
Teresa, do you have a question? Do you mind, Elizabeth, is it Ushers 1 or 2 that your son has?
He has Ushers 2A.
2. Oh, okay. So more of the hard of hearing?
Yes. The thing about Ushers, I'm actually recently signed up to be an Usher advocate here in California. Every mutation is different. Every child with USH 2A has a progression of vision loss that is different from one another. Unless you have the funding to study each different person and their genetic mutation, we have no idea when his vision loss is going to start. The school system doesn't even view his vision loss as being prevalent now, even though I've had a retinal specialist in San Diego tell me he's already seen signs of the vessels being in threat. So that's a problem that I want to get also installed into his IFSP, even though it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and it's really hard with Ushers, with the different, it's different for everyone. It's not a one size fits all. Another good resource that you could be involved with. I mean, I'm a parent who's trying to pull in people. Maybe you know someone that they could know someone that they know someone, and we're trying to recruit people. But every state has what's called a Parent Training Information Center. California, I believe it's called Warm Line. They're the ones who helped us when we moved, try to figure out who I can connect with for my son. But you can't always connect with the PTI for the state, Parent Training Information Center. But also every state has a families to families health information center. They help families specifically, with the, healthy world too, but they don't always align with how we raise our children, how we keep our kids healthy and how they're in school. You kind of have to have both. But also related to the deaf blind program for California, we do have one. There is a specialist. So, I mean, you always have to ask. There's nothing to lose just asking other parents and asking them and recruiting other people, and just, you know, ask parents who have also been involved in, you know, sent their kids off, or, you know, refer, and then you could pull more resources in. I mean, it takes a village. It does take a village. So make sure that you ask. That's what they're there for. And if you look on the chat, Rachel just shared a link to an organization for you, California Deaf Blind Services. If you haven't connected with them yet, this is Nick saying that.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions, Elizabeth, or do you feel confident?
Do you guys have any resources to speak to someone about an IFS or an IEP advocate?
Deaf Community Services' newest department is called the Client Support Services. And that's Scott Keller. He's the director of the department. He just set up an IEP advocate, so he could send advocates to your IEP meeting to help support you.
Okay.
I can connect. I can have him connect with you after this.
Sure. Yes. And or through Shannon. I talk to Shannon daily.
Perfect. Okay, will do.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have time for one more question, or Delfina?
I just had a tip. I remember going into my first IEP meeting, and this really helped me a lot. I heard that if you I wrote a letter saying exactly what I felt my daughter needed, and I just wrote everything down, because when you go there, you're probably gonna forget a lot, and at the moment, so it's a good idea to write a letter to them, let them know exactly what it is, not what you want, because when you go in there saying, oh, I want this, I want that, it's what that child needs. So I wrote a letter and I said, my child needs this, and the reason why, backing that up, and that just really helped a lot, because at the moment, like I said, it's very overwhelming. So just a tip.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Hello?
Okay. Any last questions? Oh, do we have a question? Who said this? Sorry. Is it TMO?
Yes, it's me. It's Carla. Hello. Yes, my name is Carla. I have a 12-year-old deaf kid. Her name is Mariana. And I would like to share something with Elizabeth. I don't know if I can get your number maybe, so I can text you some information for the blind institution. My daughter recently, she got a cane, and she's gonna get a vision and mobility training for her cane. So maybe they can help you on the early age of your kid, because I believe your kid is almost 3.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
It's a very good idea to start early, because they can get independent mobility, to just be familiar with the cane, and also what I recommended you too is to write the letter, what do you want for your kid. That is very good point. Like, you can write whatever you need for your kid, you write it down, and that's it.
Thank you.
If you want, you can send her privately on the chat. You can send her privately your number so that you guys can connect.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Oh, good idea. Great idea. Okay, do we have any other questions? Do we want to add anything? Anyone before we wrap it up? I guess we'll wrap it up with your favorite tip for parents with deaf and hard of hearing children. So let's start with Damian. What's your favorite tip for children who have deaf and hard of hearing kids? Miriam is saying, well, I learned something new, but from my daughter, who's hard of hearing, going to a residential school or a hearing public school, it's very important you as the parent expose your child. if you were to place my daughter into a hearing school, we have to involve them to encourage them to be involved in the deaf community. If she were to decide to go into a deaf residential school, make sure that she's included in the hearing community so she benefits for both. So that way she could benefit in both communities, in both worlds in the future, and she's able to code switch, and the easier it will be. So that's some advice that I got that I think is my favorite tip that I've received that I'd like to give. Thank you so much. Damian, did you want to add anything or? No, I'm good. Okay, perfect. Delfina, what's your tip for
I would
parents?
say get involved as much as you can. You never know who you're gonna run into, who you're gonna meet. I've run into advocates, teachers, educators. I'm constantly signing in public with my daughter, and someone will approach me, or, you know, and later on, you know, don't be afraid to ask for numbers, exchange numbers. It'll be the best thing you ever did. You can always reach out to somebody if you need to.
Thank
Oh,
you.
is that pretty?
Teresa?
Come here.
Tip.
Come here. No.
So for those of you, the parents who are, get an expert. Oh, sorry, Elizabeth, if you could go ahead and mute your microphone. I'm so sorry. Oh, sorry about that. So parents always pulling in an expert. The experts are people who live that, who have experienced that. Deaf adults, getting them involved in your child's life. If your child has any other disabilities, getting people who have that disability, they know exactly what it's like. They can tell you what you need. So also, you know, my mom, or, you know, they have that motherly instinct or their fatherly instinct with your kids. Trust that. You know, just please always use deaf adults as your resource. They could be your coaches. They can be involved as role models for your children's future. I love that tip. Thank you. Kathy, final tip.
Self-care. Take care of yourself and enjoy the journey, because you never know where it's going to take you.
Yeah, very true. That's a good one. Well, we did it in an hour and a half. This was a great panel. Thank you so much for our panelists. Thank you for your time being involved, explaining your experiences and your journey raising deaf children. Thank you to our interpreters, ASL as well as Spanish. And a big thank you to the CSUN DEAFProject for sponsoring this and making Merry Mondays happen. Merry Mondays, if you want to know what it's about, every Monday we get together on Zoom. The first Monday is open floor, so we just socialize and share stories. Then Delfina, she always runs that. The second and the fourth Monday is a free ASL class through Zoom, and then the third Monday is through an educational event. So we will be posting those soon. Okay, well, enjoy the rest of your evenings. Again, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night. ASL rocks.